Hello and welcome to the Cambridge Skeptics live stream. Cambridge Skeptics are a not-for-profit educational organisation in the Cambridgeshire area for the promotion of positive skepticism, critical thinking skills and science and all that fun stuff. Very excited to see how many people we have already watching. It's very impressive numbers already. And that is all due to this man below me, who you've all come to see. So I will hand straight over to Pranav, or aka Science is Dope, to get the ball rolling.
Thank you, Andrew. And the things you said about critical thinking and all these things, all the things you mentioned are basically what I try and do with my channel as well. So it's great to connect with all of you from all the way across the globe. And let's begin. I told you that I'll talk about a little bit about. How science is how people use science in India, and it's not the way the way science is meant to be used. Science is more of a method of trying to you know trying to figure out what the universe is like, trying to inquire and understand the things we see and all that. But science is not used that way in a lot in most of India, and I'll talk about why exactly. um, First, I guess I have to talk about YouTube and social media. First, what do you if you're in India, what do you typically see when you log on to YouTube? So you might see a bunch of Bollywood songs, you might see some local language content, and some more genres like tech content, and that makes it like any other youtube.com and on in the US or in the UK or whatever. But there's also a bit of religious content, and people in India tend to be so religious that YouTube pushes this content because people tend to click on it. Hinduism, especially, because that's a majority religion in India. Some 70-80% of people are Hindu. And see, everything. Oh, okay. I'll also say that, if when I talk about religious content, that could be something like some devotional songs or something, or some mythological stories in video format or whatever. And all of that is fine, all of that is great if you like making that sort of content, or if you like watching that content. Yeah, go ahead, feel free. More power to you. But because the algorithm tends to push this kind of religious content, what tends to happen is these content creators that have been coming up lately over the last maybe 1 or 2 years, they tend to create extremely religious content that misrepresents science. So one such video that very recently, maybe the last week or the week before that, just came out recently. That's this video. If you can share my screen.
Yeah.
1 second. Yeah.
Yeah, there.
So it's this video. It came out just I don't know. It came out 2 weeks back. It's right there, and it's got 367K views, and it's if you watch the video, it's complete bullshit. I'm sorry. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear here.
Don't worry.
Yeah, so it's complete bullshit. But because they used a bit of Hinduism to talk about this idea, it gets a lot of clicks. So
So
basically,
you're
the
saying that
whole
Darwin did not copy Lord Vishnu?
not at all. I mean, how? See, it's just it's so easy to clickbait
Yeah.
in India, all you have to do is connect whatever you're trying to say, connect it with religion somehow, and use some religious imagery in your thumbnails. And this idea is basically that, okay, so Vishnu is a god in Hinduism who had all these avatars, and who had these incarnations, and apparently the incarnations follow uh, a sequence of they start with uh, an incarnation that's like a fish, and then you have a mammal. These are all animals. You have a half lion, half beast, half man, half beast, and then a bunch more human forms that go from not fully formed to fully formed, that sort of thing. And they use this to draw parallel with the sequence of life that we know from fossil records or whatever. And they make another mistake here. They say that this is what Darwin said, when what Darwin said was about natural selection and not the sequence of life forms.
Yeah.
So they say that, hey, Vishnu's avatars are basically uh, Darwin's theory of evolution, when they have no idea what Darwin said. They have no idea what this theory of evolution is. And yeah, this kind of content gets clicks.
On the
And
positive side, at least they're using religion to support science rather than deny science, as they do here.
I want to talk about that too. They don't use religion to support science, they use science to support religion.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So what they do is, see, uh, so I'll get to this point. I think I'll go in the order that I planned.
Okay, sorry.
So there's also another idea that the Shivling, that's a religious symbol from Hinduism. Shivling is supposed to be associated with a lot of energy or something. So people claim that it's found where radioactivity is highest in the country and all that. And there are many such ideas, and I will show you another image. So these are a bunch of such thumbnails that promote this kind of these kinds of views. So even this one, which talks about spaceships from ancient India, apparently there was a book that talked about some flying machine or something. They say that, okay, there's some. Also, in addition, there's a mythological story which talks about a flying machine, and they say that, hey, we had all this technology back maybe 1,000 years back, but it's all been destroyed, it's all been forgotten. We had invaders that came to this country and destroyed all the documents that actually talked about this. And and this particular channel also has a lot of such conspiracy theory videos, which involve a lot of you know uh, religion, temples. Hinduism talks about flat Earth. That's what this video is. And there were cell phones and temples, that cell phones and tablets 1,000 years back. So they say, I mean, there are videos like that, and
I remember some of these ideas coming out in a science conference about 5 years ago, where they had fighter jets and cloning and stories about nuclear bombs
happened
that they're drawn from the ancient texts.
That happened in 2015. By the way, you can stop sharing now, I guess. So that happened in 2015. There was an Indian Science Congress or something, and in the speech, someone talked about this. So there's a lot of misrepresentation of science, and half of it is because of people trying to use science to prop up religion, and it's almost always Hinduism. None of the although there's a lot of misrepresentation of science in the other religions as well, it's not as prevalent. and it doesn't go as viral on social media as much as the ones I showed you. And I try to tackle some of them on my channel. But I think the question here should be, why does this content work? Why do people tend to click on this sort of content and watch all of it, which is what makes you to push this content? So, and the answer to that is, even though India is a country that has quite a lot of, scientifically well educated people, like you go to any part of the world, you'll find a lot of doctors or engineers that are all Indian. So science education is really good in India, but scientific temper, you can't say the same. And why is that? So I try to look a bit into it, and I think many people that are here on the stream will share a similar view as well. uh, India has, see, most of the population in India, they're all middle class. The population is mostly middle class, so most people on social media. By the way, I talked about social media right now, and social media is a reflection of what happens in the offline world, what happens in your culture. So these myths about, how Hinduism was so scientific, so it's so amazing, that's, you can find a lot of that offline as well. I just took YouTube as an example. So coming back to what I was saying, so India, the economic state of most families had not been all that great. So their priority over the last few decades, maybe right after independence, was to improve that economic state. And the best way to do that is to get a job that pays well. And the jobs that pay most well, at least in the last maybe few decades, were engineering and medicine jobs. And that's why you will find a lot of Indians who are engineers or doctors. Um, but so families would kind of push their kids to do well in science, choose science as an option for the studies or whatever. And so science was always seen as this means to an end, and that end was getting a good job and getting good money. So science was never seen as, what science truly is. No one really cared about the intrinsic beauty of science. People learn science not for science, not because they wanted to, but they learn science sort of, because that's what would eventually get them a lot of money. So this is kind of what leads to that difference in amount of scientific education versus amount of scientific temper in the country. And
And
it's
plus, we know, like, there's loads of examples of people who are scientifically or medically trained who like step outside of their area of expertise and start recommending all sorts of pseudoscience. It's like just having a scientific education on its own doesn't completely inoculate you against non-scientific beliefs. It just, provides an advantage.
yeah, true. I've seen that in a lot of new young earth creationist Christians. There are a lot of really qualified scientists among them.
Yeah.
But it's kind of because they've been indoctrinated into their religion well before they got into science, right? So they use science to validate things in their religion rather than learn science for itself. But I would say things are a bit different in India. Uh, it's not really because they were indoctrinated into their religion that they had such bad scientific temper. It's because science mostly was only seen as a means to improve their economic state. And I think some of these questions about the universe and about life and all these things, they don't care about what science has to say about them. They would rather find those answers from religion. In fact, you can actually go to my channel. There's a video where that I did on. If you want, I can share my screen. I'll show you which video I'm talking about.
Yeah, let me know when you're ready.
1 second. Okay. So, yeah, you can share my screen. Is it shared?
Yep. I can
1
see the
second.
YouTube list.
Think I need to see you guys as well. So yeah, so this is the video I was talking about. So there's this phenomena in India called the God Man, where there are these,
Is that a god man?
yeah, that is a god.
You can tell from the
Although
beard.
he doesn't like being called that. So, I just realized this is one. Okay, it doesn't matter. So, yeah, you can stop sharing now.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any point showing that video. The reason is okay. That's another long story. Anyway, I'll talk about that after I say this. So. That video that I just showed you is one where I criticize, what that Godman says in the video. And basically, the original video is kind of like, the Godman is sitting under a tree. There are a bunch of really well qualified professors from these top tier colleges from India, sitting and listening to what he has to say about, the universe and dark matter and dark energy and all that. And they're asking questions like, science recently found out that the universe began so many billion years ago. What do our scriptures say about that?
Mm.
And I was just laughing because these are really well qualified scientists asking these questions to someone so unqualified in science. And that's a I guess that's a perfect example of people, despite their scientific qualifications, using religion to answer these questions which science should answer. So yeah, and I'll tell you why I didn't play that video. Because originally when I made that video, I used parts of their video to and commented on that, but I got a copyright strike, so I re-uploaded the video without using any of their content. So there was no point. I just remembered right now. That was so long back, I forgot. But yeah, so that's what I want to say. It's like most people in India for don't want to do science because science is interesting. They want to do science because that'll lead them to money. So yeah, that's what I want to say, I guess.
I
I
want
hope
to ask
I
you about like
Yeah.
another factor, sorry, like that could
Yeah.
be responsible for the phenomenon that you're seeing. Because what struck me from the examples that you showed is that they seem very positive. Like what you said, it's not about using science to sort of prove our agenda in our religion, but it's sort of showing how our culture and our religion has a part is sort of part of the scientific thinking. Obviously, with lots of flawed reasoning behind it. But I wonder how much of it is a reaction to colonialism, and that, like that feeling that India deserves a seat at the table and deserves to celebrate its amazing culture and history, and there have been reasons why that hasn't happened for like 400 years, and this is kind of a reaction to that.
So for sure, the culture and the history of India, I think, definitely has a lot of beauty in it. A lot of like religious literature and a lot of stories from mythology even are really interesting. Even if you go through the mythologies that in that these people use in their videos also, there the mythology itself is really interesting on its own. But what they do is they try to make it seem even more awesome than it is,
Yeah,
and for that they misrepresent science to do that. And what it does, uh, you just said it's positive, but I wouldn't agree with that, because um,
that's fair.
it's so much of a misrepresentation of science that that people who take it seriously get the wrong idea of what
Right.
science is. And eventually they actually, and there are people, I've seen them, there are people that seriously believe that, hey, my religion talked about this way before science did. Those people who come up with science, those people from the west, they don't know anything. My ancestors knew all this way before any of them, so screw them. So it kind of does tie in a bit with that. There is some leftover resentment among some people after India's colonial past, or whatever, and they act out that resentment through these kinds of ideas. So yeah, I hope I answered your.
Yeah,
I
because, and I guess like
responded.
what you're saying is even like even if it is acceptable and to be celebrated, like wanting to celebrate your culture and its history,
Mhm.
the reason why you want to get involved
Mm.
in the name of science is because it's not okay to do that by misrepresenting how science works. And I guess
Yeah.
it reminds me, like, I'm from Canada originally, and
Okay.
we're very interested in like not being mistaken for Americans. And so there's lots of like, government like teaching about like, wow, look at all these cool things that Canadians have done in like science and history. Um, and at first, some of the examples that you showed kind of reminded me of that, but I guess the difference is that um, even if like they might be slightly, like the links might be slightly exaggerated, like for example, a Canadian invented basketball. Uh, the facts are still sort of presented accurately. And I guess that maybe that's the difference, is it's like it's okay, it's okay to want to celebrate these things, but what we can't do is argue about how science works. Like that's not the way to do it.
Mm. Yeah, and another problem that arises with this is that with people getting the wrong idea of science is that uh, you know now is a terrible time to not be interested in science, because the world is moving to a future where there's gonna be interplanetary travel, or things like asteroid mining, things like gene editing, and people probably living for 200 years or whatever. So when you're more interested in your religion because you feel it's superior to something like science, and you turn away, or you get people to turn away from science, uh, I think it's harming the society a bit. And Yeah, and if you look at YouTube India or anywhere in Indian culture, there are not a lot of voices speaking out against this. In
Mhm.
fact, all the channels in English are way too small compared to mine. They've reached out to me also. That's the only reason I saw them. Otherwise, I wouldn't have seen them. And if I didn't exist, I think there wouldn't have been any significant voice calling out, the bullshit that these people
Hmm.
present. So yeah,
I I
yeah,
take care of the social media and I look at the news feeds and I see a lot of news feeds from India because I've got search sets up for things like Ayush and Ayurveda. And I don't see any criticism in the popular press either.
yeah. That's also because the government we have in India right now is kind of extremely supportive of things like Ayurveda and alternative medicine. They have an entire ministry called
Hmm.
Ayush, that kind of protects all schools of alternative medicine in India, and nobody really wants to you know uh, get, get some legal consequence out of calling them
Yeah.
out. But there are still some genuine doctors that I know that call alternative medicine out.
Hmm.
And yeah, and you can actually go on Twitter. There is a person called the Liver Doc. I think his handle is at the rate THELIVERDR,
Mhm.
the liver doctor. He's actually in from what I've seen, at least on Twitter, he's the biggest voice that calls out alternative medicine, because he's seen a lot of patients that have even died, even or gotten severe liver injuries because of these Ayurvedic concoctions that don't even undergo proper testing. uh, but at the same time, the only reason it kind of survives is because uh, a lot of people have a soft corner for Ayurveda, because they feel, hey, it came from my country, my
Mhm.
ancestors created this. They're all really smart people, so what they came up with must have been great. And yeah.
I remember
So
having a discussion with someone that I work with, who was from India. I used to work with, and um, we were talking about like, oh, I'm like feeling a bit sick, and he was like, well, you need to drink some turmeric because that'll make you feel better. And I was like, well, I mean, it actually doesn't. And but what was really interesting is that we're both data and statistics people. Like that's our jobs.
mm,
And like, and I was kind of saying, like, listen, the same statistics that you use in your job every day to make decisions also tell us that there's no evidence that turmeric helps any more than anything else. But the thing is, but then I said, like, but at the same time, if that's what you always had when you were a kid and it makes you feel better, when you're feeling sick, then do it if you like the taste and you find it comforting, of course. Like in that context, you're not sort of preventing yourself from getting a liver transplant that you need or
mm.
something, because you're relying on that.
Yeah, I think the person you were talking about was probably biased, because as a kid, he or she has been repeatedly told that this is good. You can
Yeah.
have this when you're sick, and it probably worked a couple of times,
But like
not
I was
because of
told that
any.
chicken soup helps too.
Yeah,
And I still sometimes when I'm feeling really sick, I'm like, yeah, I just need some chicken soup because like that's what I remember having when I was a kid. And like that's okay.
yeah. So for things like these, because they're biased in favor of maybe in favor of Ayurveda in this case, or some home remedy for some kind of trivial sickness, they might prefer that. That's what you're saying. But for something that's not so trivial, something
Yeah.
like even cancer, There are people that offer Ayurveda and stuff, and that's when that's when this love for or this preference or this uh, not being scientific can be harmful.
Yeah. I want to
Yeah.
ask you what you said about there being sort of a ministry for this in
Yeah.
the government.
Is
Yeah.
that like the Ministry of Magic in Harry Potter?
Ministry of Magic, yeah. Like, how much do you think that the sort of state-sponsored pseudoscience is a problem? And I'm well, when you mentioned that, like, I'm wondering what examples of that are there, like in the UK, for example. And we have had until very recently, and it's still a little bit ongoing, for example, homeopathy being funded in the NHS here. So we're not, it comes with a different flavor in different countries, but I think we all suffer from state-sponsored pseudoscience in some way. Do you think that kind of top-down perspective is a problem, or do you think it's more sort of grassroots with the everyday people?
I think it's both. But yeah, the grassroots problem is what I just spoke about till now. But there's also a top down problem as well. The government, it's not only alternative medicine. The prime minister himself has talked about, how there was plastic surgery in India. You can find all sorts of stuff. I'm not dissing the PM here, but there are people at the national level that use things like yoga and alternative medicine, to prop to say that they are effective treatments for things like blood cancer and stuff, and and I just laugh that
Yeah.
I just laugh when they say that, but at the same time, there are people that do take this seriously. And when your own government
Yeah.
promotes, uh, these kinds of alternative medicines, you would, if you're not exposed to ideas like what we are discussing right now, you would think that it's valid. The validity that you feel would be much higher because your own government endorses it. And why would they do that if it wasn't tested, wasn't, they're not aware of all the other reasons why the government would, endorse something like this. And it's been particularly the case when the current after the current government came to power. Before that, this Ayush existed, but it wasn't a ministry in the government. It was a small body that kind of looked after alternative medicine, I guess. But after this government came to power, it became a ministry of its own. So yeah,
Yeah, that's something I wanted to ask about. I remember running into an elderly Indian physicist in a bar a couple of years back. Because
Was he okay?
This is Cambridge, and that's what happens. And he was very concerned about where science was going in India, and he said it didn't used to be like this. It's going a bad way. Has things changed, or did he have an overly nostalgic view of the past?
I think things are worse now. Just over the last maybe 5 years, I've seen things getting worse. So I'm sure it's worse compared to what he was talking about. So yeah, I don't think it's getting better. But what I also see is a lot more voices speaking out against things like alternative medicine, uh, against religion. So I think social media has had positives like that, but it also has had negatives, spreading these kinds of ideas among more people and turning them away from science. And yeah.
So there was a journalist arrested in Delhi last week for what was it? Hurting religious sentiments. How much of a worry is that for you?
So there is a there's a section called Section 295A in the Indian Penal Code. That's basically a law that you cannot create religious disharmony within the country, and that kind of makes sense for a country like India with a lot of people of different faiths and all these different things. But people are using it to an extent where it's sort of they're calling any sort of uh, like ideas they don't like that involve religion, even if it doesn't offend or speak in a way that any normal person would call blasphemy. Even if there's no blasphemy, if they don't like it, they'll use that law to you know sue you. And yeah, basically there's not a lot of freedom of speech in India. And ironically, this same constitution also talks about how it is the duty of every citizen in India to develop a scientific temper.
Hmm.
So there's an Article 51H in the Constitution that says this, and it's ironic that both these things are seen in the same country, where your freedom of speech for questioning all these things is kind of curtailed, but at the same time, the Constitution asks you to develop a scientific temper. So, yeah, that's ironic.
Are there any types of issues where you've found it easier to like engage people in thinking scientifically? Like, there are some beliefs that are really, really deeply connected for people to their like culture and religion, and those are very difficult to influence. But have you found other areas of pseudoscience that are maybe more easy to persuade people to think scientifically about?
So, I think in the majority of okay, in certain parts of Europe and maybe even the US, anti-vax
Mm.
notions are pretty strong. Like, there are a lot of people that hold such notions. That's not really all that prevalent in India.
Mm.
People in India readily accept vaccines. So I think anti-vax kind of has a lot to do with Christianity, right? Like there are
I don't know where like
so when Edward Jenner first came up with the vaccine, I think there were a lot of religious voices against it, because apparently diseases are like a punishment from God,
okay, yeah. That sounds very
and
Christian to me.
yeah, if you use a vaccine, you're basically meddling with what God planned for.
Yeah.
So
I think
meddling with God's plan.
the
Yeah.
sort of modern anti-vax movement is more conspiracy theory. It's not
Yeah.
trusting the government and wanting to have autonomy over what goes into your body and not being forced to do things like that. I think I think you're right that it started out quite as a religious thing, but I'm not sure it is so much anymore.
Well, and it also started out as in the 90s as a very like hippie mom kind of thing. Like it was a lot of female parents sort of being into natural ingredients and kind of it was being spread around that. And then I think it shifted since the pandemic into that that sort of that right-wing conspiracy angle. Now we've got some other people like on both political ends of the spectrum, undermining vaccine science.
There was a period when what's his name, Andrew Wakefield.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he created all the autism controversy and everything.
Yeah.
Which is a genuine like a small conspiracy. Like
yeah.
there was like it's really interesting that like we're so drawn to these stories that are interesting. And that's why, Chris and Andrew have talked a lot about, that's why people believe in conspiracy theories, is because it makes such an interesting story. With Andrew Wakefield and the vaccine, the MMR vaccine, there's a genuine like conspiracy theory, on a small scale, for why he was motivated to lie about the truth, but they're not interested in that.
Yeah. So anti-vax is something that people don't have much of a problem with in India. Like people readily accept vaccines, as far as I've seen. I'm sure there's a small
I hope it
proportion of people.
continues.
Huh, what's that?
I said, I hope it continues.
Yeah, let's hope. I'm not too hopeful because I know I've seen I've seen conspiracy theory groups, in local languages like so my mother tongue is Malayalam, and I know of groups within Telegram, Malayalam groups within Telegram that spread ideas like flat Earth and 5G and vaccine misinformation and all that. So I'm not very hopeful. I think it's kind of growing, but let's see what the future holds.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen things that say in India, misinformation spreads a lot through WhatsApp groups and sort of family groups. Is that?
Yeah.
That's correct, is it?
That's true. That's true. So the thing is, the older generations are my parents and maybe my grandparents. That age group has a lot less scientific temper than maybe my generation. So it kind of spreads from that generation, and WhatsApp is the platform where my generation kind of interacts the most with the older generations, and a lot of things they send in the groups are forwards supporting religion and talking about how the religion was scientific and all that. So
One thing that my friends in India have told me, which was surprising to me, was that like the number of messages that get sent on WhatsApp, like compared to like how I would interact with my like extended family and friends, like it'd be like everyone sends a hello message every single day in the group chat. Although these days we just post Wordle scores, so like maybe it's the same thing. But like it surprised, like just different ways of interacting. It surprised me, like the number of conversations happening on WhatsApp seems so much higher.
So I don't know why that is. I think when people first start adopting online chats and everything, they don't know how to behave in an online world, how an online interaction is supposed to take place, and maybe we're seeing some side effects of that. Give it a few years, I think it'll it'll become more evened out, but
Got a few questions from the chat, which I'd like to bring. I don't know if Erica's going to be able to
No, I was
them to bring them up on the screen, but
I'll give it a go. Are you starting at the top?
Yes. So one question, which are not really related to the topic at hand, but we've had someone who wants to know how you deal with your hate comments and how you keep your anger under control.
So I had been getting hate comments. So there was a really old video, maybe 2 years back, that I uploaded on Sadhguru. He is another godman who's really, like, his pseudoscience is so prevalent on YouTube that so it was with that video that I kind of first blew up. My channel first blew up, and since that video 2 years ago, I've been getting hate comments, and over the years, I guess I've learned to tune it out and just ignore them. So yeah, how do I deal with them? I ignore them mostly. And how, I mean, when you ignore them, you don't get angry at all. And plus, I don't really get angry all that much very easily. I mean, people can type whatever in the safety of, you know, uh, behind the screen, they can type whatever hate comment, but they'll never say that to my face. I think real anger and maybe even fear should be reserved for something that happens to you in real life rather than getting angry at comments. So yeah.
Another
Yeah.
question, which I really like this question because
Yeah.
it's: do you think that fiction based on the mythology might play a part on why these false claims get made? So we're seeing, even over in this part of the world, there is more looking at fiction from Hindu mythology and stuff like that, bringing that into sort of mainstream stuff over here. Obviously, that's more the case over there. I remember watching one of your videos where you were talking about book series where they reinvent the mythology from the religion as fiction. So do you think that plays a part?
It does play a part. That's what I think, but I don't know how much of a part it plays. So there was my latest upload is about the shivling and how it's how there are claims that it is associated with radioactivity, and it's actually not, and that's what my video is about. But I talk about a book. Recent fiction thriller based on mythology, where this idea of how the shivling is kind of radioactive is there in that book. So I don't know how big a role it plays, but yeah, I think there are people who would read that and take it seriously. So yeah, I think to that extent there is a part for these to play, that these play, but I don't know how big they are. Yeah. Any?
Cool. I'm just trying to see if there's any other questions. If people have any questions, please ask. One thing I was going through some of your videos today, and I said this to you before the stream. I found really interesting is that you have very much the same sort of issues pop up, but with a different sort of characteristics to them. So I very much enjoyed your video with the dowsing with the coconut. I thought that was really interesting to see a problem that I'm aware of, I've written about and stuff, like talking about dowsing, but with a very different face to it. And I think that's really interesting. Are there any other sort of things like that where you have a very distinct version of something that happens more globally?
So I did one video on something called midbrain optimization. Midbrain something, I forgot the actual name. I think it's also it recently came up with a new name called brain optimization or something. And what is the name? Okay. So there was a Russian group that used to do exactly the same thing. So it's basically blindfolding little kids and getting them to see objects and tell, some visual features of it, like its color, or read the numbers on a currency note.
From Stranger Things, right?
Huh?
like it's what they do in Stranger Things, right? With they put the kids in the isolation chamber.
I've
No,
not
okay,
seen
don't worry.
Stranger Things.
You should watch it.
Yeah. So there was a Russian
Wait,
group
did we get a
that
sponsor?
So we're yeah.
So there was a Russian group called Bronikov or something that did exactly the same thing. So this whole thing, I did a video on this too. This whole thing is kind of a scam because all they're doing is kind of looking through the gap in the blindfold between the blindfold and the nose, and looking at the color or whatever, and reading whatever. If you give them a book, they're not actually reading without looking, they are reading by looking. But they make you think that they're reading without looking, and apparently it strengthens your brain somehow, and kids become better at studies or whatever in school or whatever. And parents, in their need to make sure the students perform well in school and get good jobs, they would fall for this scam very easily. So I did a video on that too.
Cool.
Other than that, yeah, the typical things like alternative medicine, ideas from alternative medicine. And so one of the images that I showed earlier, if you can share my screen.
Mhm.
So there's this channel that promotes things like flat earth and all. And again, apparently Hinduism supports flat earth. So yeah. So yeah. Yeah, that's it. So apart from this, I can't think of anything else.
Yeah, no worries. Got another good question here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What do you think can be done to promote scientific fervor and skepticism in India?
I think the first thing, people need to understand that, what the way science has been represented to them, has been shown to them, there are flaws in that. And when people need to understand that there is a problem before they start addressing that problem. Because when they understand that, they need to seek out, rational content or whatever, I think people will naturally seek out uh, content that fights all this, that talks against all this. And another thing to promote scientific fervor is, I think people should be more inclined towards questioning ideas. I think so. There is this, in Indian families, you don't question elders. That's kind of seen as disrespectful. And ideas from religion and whatnot kind of hide behind the protective barrier of this notion of not disrespecting elders. I think uh, you don't have to be disrespectful when you're questioning an idea, but you need to learn how to question things without being disrespectful, I guess. But yeah, once you have these things, I think you'll start going in the right direction. And eventually, i think I think you just need these two things to start being thinking more scientifically. Yeah.
And there's
Uh,
two kind of related questions that
Hmm.
maybe you want to answer at once. The first one is
One,
like, do
two,
you
three.
think we don't have enough resources to give the
Yeah.
quality science education?
So
Kind of related to that also is there's kind of two similar questions. Yeah, the way it's written here. Do you think the education system doesn't do enough to promote the scientific way of thinking? What do you think about that?
I think we spoke about how science education is not the same as creating people with scientific temper.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think that kind of answers this question as well. There is a lot of promotion of science education, but no promotion of, or very little promotion of a scientific way of thinking in schools in particular. So yeah, it does kill the curiosity of children somehow. Despite this sort of a thing being there, when I was learning also, I was a curious kid. I was enthusiastic about learning, and I was curious about things in science, things about the universe, things about about nature and all that. But that curiosity kind of was there in me despite the system. So I don't think the system promotes curiosity in any way. At least I know how it's been in the last 5 or 10 years. I've been out of the education system, but I think things are sort of improving. There is a I know when it came, but in the past 3 or 4 years, there's been some changes to education, like some, uh, things like syllabus or things like the curriculum has kind of changed. I think the system now is kind of geared towards critical thinking more than learning how to think rather than what to think. So I think recently there's been a positive change, but I don't know how good that is.
Do you
I
think the
still
change needs to come from the top, or do you think there's things that people can do?
I think it needs to come both ways. From the top, these are some of the things they could do. They could, stop promoting unscientific bullshit, and also try and improve the education system towards getting students to critically think about things. And from the bottom up, I guess it's the earlier question I answered: how people can develop a scientific thinking. It's probably by learning to question things
Mhm.
without being disrespectful. And yeah, I think
And do you
with
think people we've got kind of two similar questions here about like the difference between um like here's this is a nice way to phrase it, the sort of is it related to a lack of proper education in the humanities, um and I guess like what I'm wondering is like, are there things that people can do outside of school, outside of the school system, to encourage this way of thinking, or
so
similarly this one?
I don't know what they meant by humanities affecting scientific temper. I'm not very sure about what they meant, but yeah, things outside of school. When you're naturally inclined towards science, I think you'll naturally develop. So the people who are really scientifically educated, a majority of them don't have an inclination towards science. So developing that inclination is something that can be done outside of school. So things like um, stargazing societies, or things like groups that uh, independent groups that develop, what can I say, so maybe groups that try to uh, conduct workshops around experiments and stuff.
Mhm.
Maybe some of those things can happen outside of schools, but yeah, I think any activity that kind of nurtures this curiosity and answers questions that people have scientifically, I think those things can do a good job at this, at improving scientific temper. Um, yeah, I know what they mean by humanities affecting scientific temper. Do you?
I mean, I kind of interpret it as like potential, like the critical thinking skills could be developed in a non-scientific way by sort of looking at like thinking critically about history or philosophy, and possibly that's a reason for the lack of sort of scientific critical thinking. I'm not sure. I wanted to maybe just go to one last question, um, which is a nice thing for you to think about. There we go. This one, which is, I think someone should start a skeptic channel on YouTube in Hindi so that I can reach out to more
There,
audience in Hindi. What do you think?
there are some skeptical channels that I know of in Hindi.
Mm-hmm.
There's a channel called Aastha Mukti for this person. You can just search on YouTube. I think the spelling is ASTHAMUKTI. search. That's a rationality channel in Hindi. You can check out a person called Bimo. He's also my friend. He's got some Hindi content and he talks about a lot of rationality in his videos. And let me try and think of more. Yeah, can't think
If
of
you end
more.
up thinking about more later, we can always add them into the video
Yeah.
description afterwards.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that was great. It was really interesting, and I just want to say a massive thank you to all the people who stayed up really late over there to watch it. We've had so many people in the chat, a lot of interesting back and forth going on. So, thank you very much for that, and a lot of people recommending some good books on critical thinking at the moment. So definitely some good recommendations in there. Do you want to take a moment to just tell people where they can find out more about you, if they don't already know? I think you have a lot of fans here this evening.
So you can just search on YouTube Science is Dope. I have the same name on Twitter and Instagram. So yeah, you can just search on Google. I'm sure you'll find me. And YouTube is the main platform where most of my work is, but I also try and put out some content on Twitter and Instagram. Find me there as well. And yeah.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you very much. So next time, Erica, if you want to share my screen. So next time we were going to be talking to this lady whose name is Rosie Campbell, and she is an AI researcher. She looks at artificial intelligence. So if the subject of the inevitable robot uprising is something that's interesting to you, please join us in a couple of weeks' time. I think that's the 19th of July. We'll be doing that. But otherwise, we will say goodnight for the evening. And again, thank you to Pranav for a very interesting talk. And thank you again to everybody who came and joined us this evening. So we'll say goodnight. Good night to you all.
Good night.